So the last time I just sat down and talked about a book I had read, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun video to make, and I just finished another book, so I thought we'd give it a try again. I just finished reading The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This is another book like the previous one I was talking about, The Old Man and the Sea, that I picked up at a Goodwill at the same time I bought the other book, actually. And it's been just a really nice, small, flexible paperback to carry with me on the train commute to work. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed reading this. And there were just kind of a few main things that I thought really resonated with me that I wanted to talk about from this book specifically. I think one of them being obviously the narration style, I think is one of the main attention points. I think obviously the narration style of this book is a really big feature of the literary style, but also sort of the concept of isolation and loneliness. I think those are sort of my two main points that I want to touch on. So if those are interesting to you, then stick around. I think that in terms of the perspective, the point of view that this story is told from, obviously it comes from that first person perspective of Holden, the protagonist of the piece. And I think what makes this particularly interesting here is how evident his flaws are as a narrator and as a person, but I think in the case of this book, mostly as a narrator. I think everything he says is plagued and riddled with bias. He is a young, immature boy. He really wears his heart on his sleeve and makes his emotions and his opinions on everyone around him known to you. He talks about why he despises the kids that he goes to boarding school with all the time and the people that he surrounds him with, or different hobbies, even. Just the concept of the movies infuriates him, and this idea that he always points to of phoniness, these things that he finds so inauthentic. And to a degree, I'm sure we can all maybe relate to some of the things he says in terms of frustration at people that we don't think are genuine. But ultimately, I think that his attitude make him, quite frankly, an unlikable guy. I can understand, and I really liked reading the book because of him, because I think his narration style and the negativity is channeled in a very funny way. But I think by reading this, you can see it's no surprise that he's not getting along. There's no reason he wouldn't be struggling in school as much as he is, because he has to be so critical. He shows such a little lack of empathy for anyone, that it's no wonder that he finds himself in the spot that he's in. Really, I think another thing that becomes really clear about him is this sort of air of confidence he tries to portray in all of these emotions and these negative statements that he shares so confidently. There is an inherent desire to want to fake your experience, or his experience, I should say. At the end of the day, we're talking about a teenage boy. There's only so much knowledge you can really have at the stage of life that Holden finds himself in. Nevertheless, he talks as if he's had decades and decades of life experiences and all of these things that he just quite frankly doesn't have. And I think you really start to see that once he leaves school and ventures into the heart of New York City. And obviously, it's a city he's familiar with. It is a city he grew up in. It's a city that he lives in and travels in. Even with the boarding school he's at, he finds himself in the city, quite frankly. But even though it's such a familiar environment for him, he puts himself in positions where he's just quite frankly out of his depth. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie, Jonah Hill's movie, mid-90s, about skateboard culture in Los Angeles, where essentially a young boy, played by Sonny Suljic, I think is his name, basically hangs out with older kids in the skate scene in LA, and ultimately just finds himself in positions with people, girls and guys alike, that are just much older and more mature and more experienced than him, and he is just quite frankly out of his depth. And while I don't think Holden finds himself in as many extreme cases as as that character does, I think you can really see points where he thinks he can do more than he can. I think one of the specific ones that comes to mind is when he's staying at a motel and he requests a prostitute for the night. And he is, talking himself up and acting as if he's going to be all casual and nonchalant with this girl. And the second she gets into the hotel room, he freaks out and he's stunned and doesn't know how to act. And that confidence that he speaks with us in here so matter of factly instantly vanishes. And I think it's when you see those little signs of weakness, or those signs of, not weakness isn't the right word, they're signs of humanity. You know, the thing that he criticizes so much throughout this book, the imperfections of others, we see ultimately that he is not so different than the people that he tries to set himself apart from. He himself has his own flaws, and he himself is far from the model individual. Just because he can recognize the flaws of others doesn't make him any better. And we really get to see that in moments such as this hotel scene. I think it's important to show those moments because, we can obviously read his words or his voice with an air of skepticism because of the age he's at, because of the confidence with which he talks. But I think when Holden shows us this more vulnerable side to himself, this side that is a little bit out of his depth, is when we see that he is a person and that we can sympathize with him, even though, in a lot of ways he's an unlikable character who is this privileged boy that is not taking advantage or is not grateful for what he has, So those are some of my thoughts on Holden as a character. I think there's so much more to him, and there's so many more examples of this complexity in character. You can talk about the way he talks about women, or girls, I should say, in this story as an area of complexity to him, and that he doesn't seem to be this typical macho guy who degrades women, especially for the age he's at. I think that is something that is a little bit unique compared to some of the other male characters that are portrayed in this book. And of course, there's the scene, very difficult scene, I think, towards the end of the book where he is with his old teacher, Mr. Antolini, and Holden finds himself in a very vulnerable and uncomfortable position with this man who is much older than he is. And I think that is another one of those moments that shows, this is ultimately still just a young boy who is extremely out of his depth. And through these uncomfortable situations, we see the vulnerable side to Holden that I think ultimately makes a character who doesn't seem to have a lot going for him in terms of the charm and in terms of likability, that really start to make him resonate with me, at least, and you start to accept him for what he is, which is ultimately just a flawed human like the people he criticizes. Okay, I caught myself there getting a little rambly and repetitive when it came to talking about Holden. I think it's easy to get wrapped up in words and in literature, and especially when you're just talking like this and not really writing or planning out your thoughts, because this isn't really something I planned. I think it's fun to just come on here and talk about the first instincts and the first thoughts you have from the book, so that's kind of what I'm doing. But like I said at the beginning, I also want to talk about the theme of isolation in this book. And I think that's super interesting because Holden, throughout this book, finds himself in very crowded places that are abundant with people and social interaction. At his boarding school, he lives not only in the same room with one guy, one classmate, one peer, but pretty much directly attached to two others. And the entire school, you could not be any closer to your peers than at a boarding school. You were living amongst everyone that you go to school with, whether you like them or not. There's an abundance of social opportunity there. And then once he finally leaves the school, he finds himself back in the heart of New York City, like we're talking about earlier. And can you think of a bigger urban hub than New York City in terms of population of people, in terms of not even population, but just density of people? So much opportunity to talk and socialize. But even though Holden is, again, familiar with both of these environments, he spends a lot of his time alone. And
I think you can definitely argue that. It can be argued that, there's a lot of social interaction in this book. What are you talking about? He is talking with his peers like Ackley when he's at school. He is, meeting up with old friends in New York, old peers, old teachers, strangers in bars, and he's talking with these people. But even in the social interactions that he does have, I think you can just see and sense the isolation and loneliness in all of it. There's not a lot of people really who see Holden at the level that he wants to be seen at. He wants someone to match his cynicism and his skepticism of the world. And we never really see that. No one is ever matching or wanting exactly what he wants. I think one of the best examples of this is when he goes on his date with Sally, a friend, I guess more than a friend. I don't know really exactly what their relationship is, but someone he knows from New York. And let me caveat this by saying I do not believe Sally should go along with what Holden is wanting here. But I think when we read this passage, I'm going to kind of lead into it. Um, you can kind of see what I'm talking about not really meeting him on the level that he wants or desires. Um, Essentially, Holden is discussing this idea to run away and that Sally should come with him and become his wife, and they can live this little isolated life outside of the city and just have each other. And then this is where she comes in. You can't just do something like that, old Sally said. She sounded sore as hell. Why not? Why the hell not? Stop screaming at me, please, she said, which was crap because I wasn't even screaming at her. Why can't you? Why not? Because you can't, that's all. In the first place, we're practically children. And did you ever stop to think what you'd do if you didn't get a job? When your money ran out, we'd starve to death. The whole thing's so fantastic. It isn't even. It isn't fantastic. I'd get a job. Don't worry about that. You don't have to worry about that. What's the matter? Don't you want to go with me? Say so if you don't. So, spoiler alert, Sally doesn't go with him. Holden doesn't even go himself to wherever this land is that he wants to go. Um, and I think what we see there is that Holden has his little picturesque idea of what life should be like. He wants a life that's simpler, void of all of the narcissism, the greed, the excess of New York City and the life that he's known so far. And while you can kind of understand where he's coming from, and you can sympathize with the root of those emotions, none of his peers really understand that. And again, like I said, I don't think Sally should be responding by, yes, let's run away together and be happy forever, Holden. But I do think it is interesting to see the fact that he, Holden's not someone who is exactly, he doesn't have a lot of choice when it comes to the people he's hanging out with in this book. There's a very limited group of people that he finds acceptable. And even those people that he does don't really see the way he does and want to live the way he does. And I think that that highlights the isolation that he experiences. The only person in the entirety of this story that really meets Holden where he is and really truly seems to understand him or want to live the way that he does is his little sister Phoebe. Holden has a very complicated family life. He has three siblings that are touched on. He's got two brothers. One of them is now passed away, and that is an anger and resentment he holds on to throughout the book. He's got his older brother, BB, who is in Hollywood writing, and he kind of course, is critical of the work that his brother writes, especially the kind for movies, because as we discussed earlier, Holden hates the movies. But Phoebe is someone who can really do no wrong in Holden's eyes. She's the young, pure sister, and even at her young age, she is very level-headed and is very smart and intelligent, and he respects that about her, and he shows that respect. When he comes to her with this idea of leaving and running away forever, she is very, again, like Sally, not responsive to it. and she's actually frustrated by the idea that her brother wants to leave and kind of uproot himself and abandon his family. And again, you want to be taking what he's saying with a grain of salt, because kids can get emotional and frustrated and say, I'm quitting this or I'm leaving. But from her frame of reference, this is a really harmful and dangerous idea because she is so young and Holden means so much to her. And the idea of him being taken away is very scary to her. So much so that when he meets her before he's supposedly going to leave, she has a suitcase packed and she wants to go with him. Even though she hates the idea, she wants to be with her brother. And I think it is in seeing this impact that he has, this one moment where he's not truly alone, where someone is willing to sacrifice to meet him where he's at, that he gets a little bit of sense and ultimately decides not to leave and to stay with his family. And he doesn't really get into the aftermath of what happens when his parents find out that he's skipped a boarding school and been kicked out of boarding school, actually, or any of those details. But what he leaves us with is this idea that the love of his sister kept him grounded. And I think that that's, again, a pretty nice way to end this book. I think it, again, shows the complexity of our character. He may be bitter, he may be cynical, but he's got a soft spot for those that are really meaningful in his life and those that he loves. And I think when you see that and when you see a character react in that way, it's very difficult, at least for me, not to feel some sort of, you know, affection towards the character or appreciation towards the character. And so, you know, good read. I enjoyed it. This is, I think, a pretty typical book for people to read in high school as an assigned reading, but I never read it. I saw it. I knew I had to read it because it's something I'd never read, and I'm really happy I did. I really admire Salinger's ability to capture such a strong voice through Holden. I think, again, whether you like him or not, he has a very defined way of not only talking but just acting and behaving, the attitude he carries. It's very impressive, and I think a lot of the time it's a very enjoyable and humorous read because of that. And so, yeah, really happy that I read this. And thank you guys so much for listening to me pretty much just ramble about another book. But, you know, if you enjoyed it, stick around, maybe check out my other book talk if you haven't seen that one. And yeah, thank you so much.